This is Q&A, so the floor is open and the ball is in your court. I understand some people come just to watch the action, but the hope is that I can fill in some of the empty spaces that didn't get filled in elsewhere. When I was learning in Kollel, the Rosh Yeshiva, Tzvi Krishalevsky, used to give sources, and then we have a few days to prepare them, and then he would lecture on them. And while we were in the preparing period, he used to circulate among the pairs and ask, what bothers you? What questions do you have? Woe to you if you didn't have anything bothering you. You have any questions? What, your brain dead? I mean, nothing bothers you? Everything's smooth? Everything's clear? That's a person's mentally active. That's rarely his state of mind. I know if you've been learning in university, then you haven't developed the skill of analyzing on your own and asking questions and challenging and criticizing. That's one thing that yeshiva is good for. One of the many things that yeshiva is good for. It'll teach you how to think, teach you how to think independently, instead of just spitting back the party line like you have to do in the universities. In fact, one of the great Jewish minds of the last 200 years, Rabbi Akiva Eger, among his many works, there are glosses that are printed on almost every page of the Talmud. And very often his comment is just, take a look in such and such a place, and often he'll end it with two letters, Tzadi Ayin, which is Sorech Iyun, meaning you're reading this page. If you look at that page, you'll see there's a contradiction, which you're supposed to figure out on your own. And he says it needs analysis, meaning he's not presenting an answer to the question. The normal assumption is because he didn't have an answer. That means that in our texts you have unanswered questions. That's because you're supposed to be engaged intellectually and think on your own. It's very hard to answer his questions. First of all, you have to decide what the question was, and you may misunderstand it. But the challenge is there, put there to you on the page. When I was exploring traditional Judaism, and I first came in contact with the Talmud, one of the things that struck me is the extent to which positions are challenged. Questions are raised, objections are raised. And often, the end of the discussion is, kasha, we have no way of responding to the challenge. I thought to myself, here's a system which doesn't pretend to be perfect, doesn't pretend to have everything worked out, everything laid out. It advertises the fact that there are unsolved problems. That's a system that's interested in the truth, has nothing to hide. Often, also, various Talmudic authorities change their minds. And they say, I said this before, I made a mistake, and I'm taking a different position now. And if you're looking for a system that you feel has earned credibility, that's one of the things that you want to see in a system. I think I mentioned to you, I got a report recently in an email about someone who, child, 20-year-old, who said, he was asked whether he ever changes his mind. He says, no, if you change your mind, you're unreliable. Really? If you change your mind, you're unreliable? If you don't change your mind, you're unreliable. You don't learn anything new? At the age of 20, it's all figured out? There's nothing left to improve your opinions? I wouldn't rely on you. not for a minute. And this person has expressed a respect for Bertrand Russell. So I found a quote from Bertrand Russell himself where he said, I used to think X, Y, Z, but I realize now that it was a mistake and I've changed my mind. And I said, well, if you respect Bertrand Russell, then you shouldn't be afraid to change your mind. So this is Q&A. I'm waiting for questions. Yeah?
So I was told today about this idea about like 40 days and how you can use it to overcome addictions and break habits. And
So what was the first word?
for 40 days.
Oh, 40 days, yeah.
Like I wanted to know what the maybe spiritual meaning behind that was, or if there's any is it true?
Well, first of all, if you're talking about dealing with addiction or other psychological challenges, the Council of Torah Sources, I have this section of the book of mine that's coming out of me, as Hashem, is that you use medical expertise. You use medical expertise. Yes, you are obligated to do that. The Yeshivat Ohr says that you're a sinner if you don't. Many, many years ago, I met a young woman who was experimenting with becoming religious, and her attitude was she had a problem, she had a medical problem, a serious medical problem. She said, surely, if I keep Shabbos and if I keep kosher, God will reward me by taking away my medical problem. Sorry, wrong religion. There are no sources that say such a thing. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't pray and you shouldn't recite Psalms and you shouldn't try to improve your behavior generally. No, all of it is required. But to think that you have a spiritual solution and this is something which makes the use of medical expertise unnecessary is simply a mistake. Indeed, the Ramban says that when we have prophecy, your physical condition is a symptom of your spiritual condition. And medicine will tell you, don't treat symptoms, treat the disease. And when we have prophecy, you could go to a prophet and say, look, I have a toothache, I have a lame leg, I have whatever it is. What does God want me to do? And the prophet would tell you. And therefore it says that during that period of time, no faithful believer in the providence of God would have anything to do with a doctor. But we don't have prophecy. And one of the results of not having prophecy is that it's appropriate to use a medical profession. So whatever you say about going 40 days, going to the coast for 40 days, whatever it is, like Rabbi Heinemann of Baltimore told us, a skula, which is what this is called, a skula is something which can help. Okay. Sometimes it's worthwhile to do things that can help. Surgery isn't always successful. It can help. Some places it has a high probability of success. Other places lower probability of success. But that doesn't mean that you don't use it. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that that's all you use and that's all you do. You do everything that you could possibly do. Now, 40 is a number which completes a certain whole period of time. It's used for various other contexts as well. And therefore it's one of the ways in which one can try to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And there are many stories of people for whom it was successful, and there are stories of people for whom it wasn't successful. So I don't think one should look at it as guaranteed, number one, and number two, even if it were guaranteed, it wouldn't mean that you're free from the obligation to use all means that are available to you. The template for this is Jacob when he's coming back to the land of Israel and he hears that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men who are not there to roll out the red carpet. Esau is very angry at him and wants to take revenge. So what does Jacob do? Well, one thing he does is he sends a very elaborate bribe to Esau with a very obsequious message, I am your servant and you are my master, and so forth and so on. Second thing he does is he divides his camp in two to prepare for war, if there is war. And the third thing he does is he prays to God for success. You say, well, but of course everything depends upon God, right? Right. And if God wants him to succeed, he'll succeed no matter what. Well, maybe not. Maybe God's wanting him to succeed depends also on what he does. So the fact that God is in control and God will determine the outcome doesn't mean his own efforts are irrelevant. Because one of the things that God wants us to do is make the efforts that we can. And then it may be that God will want him to succeed if he makes the right efforts, and God will not want him to succeed if he doesn't make the right efforts. So the fact that it's all dependent upon God doesn't mean his efforts are irrelevant. So he does all three. And that's a template for future generations that we have a responsibility to use natural means to the extent we can, and to realize simultaneously that it all depends upon what God wants, and to pray to him for success in the outcome. So if a person facing any psychological challenge should use whatever expertise there is, and also make use of those processes which elevate your spirituality and elevate your focus and continuity, and require a certain amount of investment. Going to the Kaisel, to pray at the Kaisel, which is certainly a good thing to do. And do it 40 days in a row, which on Shabbos can be challenging, and you meet the challenge, that's definitely a positive step. But that's all I could call it. It's a positive step. Yeah.
So I understand that there's, due to historical events, different people follow different minhagim and halachas. But I would be under the impression that, or wouldn't Hashem want us all to have the same halachas, same minhag, in order to be more united?
I think half of that is correct. I think as far as halacha is concerned, yes, he would want us all to have the same halacha. That's why he instituted a Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin made law for the whole of the Jewish people. When there were insoluble local problems, they went to the Sanhedrin and got a decision, and we were absolutely required to follow the decision of the Sanhedrin. And in several places, the phraseology is that the Torah shouldn't become two Torahs. These do this way and those do that way, something which is less than ideal. And that means that since, now we speak of historical events, but it's all divine providence, since divine providence arranged that we should no longer have the use of a Sanhedrin, it means that the creators put us in an inferior position that's not ideal. Of course, he put us there, and that means that it has a purpose, and we have to live with the rules of the inferior condition, which means that there will be disagreements about what the halacha is. And that's something which would have been better if it hadn't been so. With minhag, I don't think it's true, because minhag is a creativity of Jewish communities to maximize their circumstances in serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And different communities live under different circumstances. That being the case, it's appropriate for each community to use that creativity in order to maximize their performance. That's why you see, for example, minhagim which are locally based because of local conditions. There are many communities which stem back to Europe, which for the night of the Seder, when you're drinking the 4 cups of wine, don't use red wine. They don't use red wine because they were subject to blood libels.
Sorry?
They're subject to blood libels, where the non-Jews would say that you slaughtered Christian children and used their blood for the Seder. You have red wine, and red is the color of blood. And there, and when you have irrational, excited anti-Semites, which you can see in the streets today if you take a look, so that's all you need to set them off. So if you use white wine, you avoid that provocation. That obviously didn't apply in Morocco, didn't apply in Algeria, so they don't have that custom. So there you understand the custom is relevant to one, not the other. Also, in European Jewry, they don't eat rice on Pesach because in their markets, the grains and rice were sold together, and the elements fly through the air, and the sacks are on the ground, and there was no way to preserve the purity of the rice from being contaminated with the 5 grains. In the Sephardi world, it wasn't like that. So in the Sephardi world, there's no such custom. So there's no hope that custom would become universal and that would unite us. On the contrary, let me push it just a tiny step deeper. Let's suppose we'll talk about music. Now, if everybody with his instruments and with his voice will sing the same note, that'll be very unified. A Beethoven symphony played by an orchestra is also very unified. It's a unification and integration of different notes at the same time. That's also unified. It isn't that they're at war with one another, but the richness of the unity is created precisely because they're different notes, not the same note. So when in minhagim, I think that's what we would see. There's a variety of minhagim, and that variety, as long as there's mutual respect, which usually there is, would not sacrifice the unity at all. And when there is differences of halacha, there are really 2 questions. Is the law derived at in a legitimate fashion? That's one question. And the other is that what God wants in heaven? Well, our only access to halacha is the process that he told us to follow. And when you have these differences of halachic decision, they are based on using the appropriate process, and therefore there's mutual respect. You know, when it comes to the kashrus of meat, the general Sephardi community is more strict than the general Ashkenazi community. What we in the Ashkenazi community call galat, that's standard for the Sephardi community. So let's imagine a Sephardi Jew, he has his meat, Beis Yosef meat, and he looks at a standard Ashkenazi Jew who doesn't eat galat. According to the Sephardi halacha, the Jew's meat is not kosher. Does he say that the Ashkenazi Jew's meat is not kosher? They say, too bad, you're going to Gehenna, you're going to suffer because you're eating treif meat? No. What he says is, we are following a medieval authority who said this, you're following a different medieval authority who said that, and we're both using the same halachic process, and the results are equally valid. So, that being the case, there's mutual respect there, and that doesn't have to it doesn't have to sacrifice unity either. But it would be better if the practice were uniform, because that's what the Sanhedrin is for. That's true. Yeah.
Follow up on that. So, you were to have, let's say, an Ashkenazi and a Sephardi at Pesach they're both eating kidneyot, and one is technically doing an avera, and one isn't.
That's right.
So, Hashem is watching over and making that decision, or
Absolutely. Watching, and he's saying, this one is following a rule, and that one is not following a rule. 100%. You might, if you want another example, let's take second day Yom Tov in Israel. So people who live in Israel don't keep second day Yom Tov. People who live outside Israel keep a second day. What happens if they come here and spend the holiday year? There are many opinions that they have to keep a second day here. So you have someone, 2 Jews, one turns on the light and the other one turns on the light. One is doing something that's perfectly permissible. The other one is violating his responsibilities. They're doing the same thing. But because their identities are different, they have different responsibilities. Definitely will be true. Yeah, what's noch? Yeah.
So we learned in the Gemara that everything's in the hand of heaven except the fear of heaven. So I heard that if in your decision, if it doesn't involve anything with fear of heaven, it's not really you choosing. Hashem's doing it for you. You feel like you're choosing, but it's really just Hashem doing it until it gets to the point where now we get to decide, something involving fear of heaven. So like if I'm going and I'm choosing breakfast and I choose 3 eggs instead of 2 eggs, it's not really me choosing. Hashem's doing it for me, and kind of just on autopilot. Is this like, do we in our lives really have not that many decisions than we think we have, or?
Well, it's a very, very good question, and it's a question that bothered me for a long time. I heard people say what you just said, and I said, philosophically, I find it very difficult for your reason, because feeling about choosing whether to give charity or not, which is a choice which involves serving our Kodesh Baruch Hu, and choosing 3 eggs or 2 eggs for breakfast feel the same. The experientially, they seem to be the same, and therefore philosophically, I would like to treat them as the same. And I said to people, if you can show me a source that says you're really on an automatic pilot, unless there's a decision between good and evil in some way, I'll accept it. But until you show me a source, I'm not going to accept it, because philosophically it's very difficult for me. That's what I said for years. And then, a few years ago, I found the source. Black and white, in the Mamar Korim, which the Ramchal wrote as a kind of summary of the Derech Hashem, the way of God, which is printed in the back of some of the editions of the way of God. He says explicitly that if it's not a choice between good and evil, you're no different from a cat. Cats have no free will, and you have no free will. Your free will only applies to decide between good and evil. So I said, okay, as we say in Hebrew, I didn't even read me a dime. I put up my hands. That's what the source says, and that's what I have to accept. Now, this next step you took, which I think is also correct, that means you're not making free will decisions as much as you thought you were. But there's a third step to take. The Chovos Levavos, one of the great early Jewish legal philosophical works, says, if you analyze it carefully and in detail, you will find that ultimately there's no such thing as simply your choice, whatever you choose. Everything is either required or forbidden. There's no neutral ground, what's called in Hebrew reshus. Meaning, in the terminology we used 2 minutes ago, when you think that the choice is neutral, I'm choosing between A and B, and it doesn't make any difference, that judgment that it doesn't make any difference could be very superficial. And if you thought about it more deeply, you'd find out that it does make a difference. And therefore, you should have regarded it as a choice between good and evil, because there really are good and evil aspects to it. Well, let me give you a couple of examples of how this works, and I think you'll see this is a template for a kind of analysis and consciousness which will have this application continuously. Sunday afternoon, and I have a free bird. I have no pressing responsibilities. I learned today's daf on the daf yomi, and there's nobody to visit in the hospital, and I've paid up all my debts. It's up to me, my free afternoon. What shall I do? Well, I have one friend with whom I could play chess, and another friend with whom I could play doubles tennis, another friend with whom I could go mountain climbing, and a certain book that I would like to read I'll do all alone. It's up to me. It's my afternoon. Free choice. Well, let's see. How am I about physical exertion? Do I face challenges that require physical exertion easily? Comfortably? Maybe I'm a little bit physically lazy. Sometimes I know I ought to do A, but it's going to be tiring, so maybe I won't. And maybe then mountain climbing would increase my physical vigor, so that when I have to make a choice to do something that's physically exhausting, I'll be more ready to do the right thing rather than avoid it. Then maybe I should really go mountain climbing. And maybe my attitude towards competition. How am I about competition? Do I have to win? Do I have to really win grandly? And that stokes my ego, and I enjoy the fact that the other person lost. How is it when we play doubles tennis and we win? Do I shake the other person's hand and say, good game, nice playing with you? Or do I say, ground you into the dust, didn't we? And maybe, if that's my attitude towards competition, maybe I ought to work on my attitude. Maybe I should play doubles tennis and make up my mind that I'm going to be supportive. maybe my partner and I will plan to lose a few points so that the other guys don't lose. 6 love, 6 love, 6 love, and win no points at all. Maybe that playing doubles tennis would work on a part of my personality that needs work. So if that's the case, maybe it isn't a free choice. If I think about the consequences, then it won't be a free choice. Now, how far can you apply that? How shall I get to the yeshiva? I could walk, I could have a bicycle, I could take a bus, or I could ask somebody for a ride. Well, again, if I walk, then I'm exerting myself physically, and maybe that's good for me. On the other hand, it's going to take more time. Take a bus, it's going to cost me some money. Ask a person for a ride, well, then I'll owe him a favor, but then doing a favor cements a relationship. So maybe that's a good idea just to cement the relationship, and I will repay the favor, and that will build a relationship. All these things are spiritually significant aspects of the choice, which mean that there could be a better and worse even in choices like that. Now let's go to the 3 eggs and the 2 eggs. How do you feel after you eat 3 eggs? How do you feel after you eat 2 eggs? Feel after 3 eggs, you feel, wow, full, satisfied, great. You could ask yourself, how often do you want to feel full, satisfied, and great on the basis of eating? If you feel that way, typically, will you be able to put up with meals where you don't feel full, satisfied, and great? How do you manage with fast days? Do they derail you? Are you really seriously irritated that I didn't get that meal that I really enjoy, and that will interfere with your ability to concentrate on what a fast day is supposed to bring out in your own spirituality? And if that's the case, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you shouldn't. I know of a person, I know him personally, but I heard about him, not a religious Jew, but he said, I don't eat to satiety. I eat till I'm 3/4 full. And then I push the plate back, because I'm in control of my eating. It doesn't control me. I don't have to eat every bite and lick the plate. I don't have to do that. I can push away the serving dish and say, I've had enough. He felt that that was part of self-control. I think even without religious training, that was a profound remark. Yes. In fact, William James, who was a great American philosopher, wrote I guess you'd call it a monograph called Habit. And in it, he's not a Jew, right, great psychologist and a great philosopher. He wrote in it that every day he tries to do something irritating. He means not irritating to other people, he means irritating to himself. And he said the reason is because the ability to do something that irritates you is like a muscle. And if you exercise it, it'll be strong. And if you don't, it won't be strong. And there are times when you'll need to do something that's irritating. And if the irritation muscle is flabby, you won't be able to do it. Now, that's a Musar thought. It's the kind of thought that our people in the Musar tradition recommend for the sake of increasing your spirituality. And he, even as a non-Jew, understood that this is a valuable practice. So when you take all of these things into mind, and there are many other dimensions like this, what you end up with is what the Yeshivat Ohr said, really when you analyze it, every choice will be a choice between good and evil. And then your free will be all the time. But in order to do that, you have to do this kind of analysis. If you didn't do the analysis, you don't see any difference between them, then indeed that's where it says that you're not really making a free choice. Yeah, you wanted to say something else?
You answered that you have to make that analysis.
That's
Otherwise, you are on autopilot. It's all just Hashem doing it. You just
That's
feel
right.
like you're making a choice, but it's Hashem.
And the fact that it feels like you're making a choice has to be understood as superficial, but deep down.
That's like almost like most of my day I'm on autopilot, basically. So I'm not making these choices.
Well, I doubt it. I think that most of the day you're acting out prior choices. When someone says hello to you in the morning and you say hello back, that's because at some point in your life you decided, I'm going to engage in this mutual recognition process in social life, and you're acting out the results of that choice. That's not the kind of autopilot that we were talking about before. That's not where God is doing it for you. It's you trained yourself to do that. And our view of that is you get credit for it every time it happens. When you make a decision and you act out that decision in the future, and in the future you don't think about it anymore because you made the decision, you get credit for every time you do it because it's a result of your decision. So there, what we could be called automatic pilot is something where it has the free will status because you used your free will to introduce that habitual behavior. That's not the same at all as it's having no significance and just deciding randomly and, in that case, not really deciding. Ja, was noch? Ja.
Say you have, someone gives you 3 eggs and you are too full to eat all of them. Would it be, like, could you see it one way as like, if you don't finish it, is that like wasting food? But you're also too full, so if you overindulge, so isn't that like kind of both? Could it, does that make sense?
I think that makes sense, and I think here we just have to be careful with the word waste. Waste should mean that I took something which had a purpose, and I either destroyed it or allowed it to just deteriorate and decay so that it couldn't serve its purpose. So if you could put it in the refrigerator for a later meal, you definitely should. So just leave it out so the bacteria will invade it and it'll turn blue and have a smell, then you have to throw it out. You definitely should do that, no question about it. But if there's no choice to do it, you're in one place, you're going to another place, it's not your food, somebody put it in front of you, so forth and so on. Since you're full, and really it's forbidden to eat more than that, it's called doing something disgusting, it doesn't have a use anymore because nothing in the context is there for it to be used for. Then you're not guilty of wasting. Wasting is only where something has a use and you don't give it that use. When we were kids, about 130 years ago, there was the terrible starvation in Biafra. And one of the things parents used to tell children is, finish what's on your plate, think of the starving children in Biafra. Okay, if you're 6 years old, and you don't know what to answer, by the time you're 9 years old, you say to your parents, wrap it up and send it to Biafra. Why should I eat it? Because they're starving. Well, how will it help them if I eat it? If it goes in the garbage pan or I eat it, it doesn't make any difference to them at all. That's food that doesn't have a use. Yeah. Listen. Yeah.
Can I ask a more like halakhic question?
You can. I'm not really trained largely in halakha. I'm trained in philosophical, but if I know the answer, I'll tell you.
So I was learning in Gemara about Shomer and like the different stages where when you're a borrower, you have the most responsibility, and even in the situation where the object that you're guarding is damaged, and it got damaged for a reason that's out of your control, you're still responsible because as a borrower, you have the most responsibility for that item. So then I asked my rabbi, what happens if, in order to prevent the object from getting lost or damaged, you have to commit an avera, and you choose not to? Are you still responsible? Like, what would you do in that situation?
Well, you can't avoid losses by committing a transgression. You certainly can't do that. And remember, everything that we experience is under the control of divine providence. So if the situation is that you'll be legally liable for the loss, and the creator of the universe said, don't do A, B, and C, and you say, yeah, but B, if I do B, then I could save it, then I could save the loss. Yeah, that's right, you could, but the creator said don't. So the creator's telling you, take the loss. So it's a no.
So you still hold responsible, for the loss of that item.
Sure, because when you say that a borrower is responsible when it's onus, when it's something that he can't prevent, what you're saying is like an insurance policy. In other words, it's not that you're being penalized for failure, for irresponsibility. If that happens, if struck by lightning, you weren't irresponsible. You just have to pay. So it's like what's in the law is called strict liability. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just that here's where the money comes back from. It comes back from here. And why is that so? Because a borrower, in the types of relationship where one person has another person's piece of property, the question is who's getting the benefit? And if somebody borrows something, the borrower is getting all the benefit. Well, if he's getting all the benefit, then he has to take all the responsibility. If he pays for the use of it, then he doesn't have to pay under those conditions because he's paying for the use of it, so he's compensating the other fellow for the use of it. Then the responsibility for that is on the original owner. So there are different ways in which you split up the benefits of the transaction. They also determine the responsibilities of the transaction. But yeah, only if you were paying because you had failed to do something and you were guilty, then I can say, well, listen, okay, I'm guilty either way. Who says I should be guilty this way rather than that way? That would be a relevant question that would have to be settled. But here it's not a question of guilt. It's simply a question of taking monetary responsibility as a part of the package deal of getting the use of something for no compensation. Yeah.
So, how do you determine between good and evil? Is it more based like from Torah, like there's like an objective good that we all kind of participate in, or is it more of like a subjective view based on your experiences and like inner kind of moral compass? Like, how do you like determine what is good, I guess?
Okay, how do you determine what is good? It's a big question, as I'm sure you're aware. And I think you put the question reasonably well. From our point of view, there is an objective good. People can be ignorant of it. People can have misunderstandings of it, but there's an objective good. And the idea of an inner moral compass, though we do credit the existence of such a thing, we also credit that with the inner moral compass you can make mistakes. So it's not guaranteed. It's not infallible. We do credit moral judgment and moral intuition to a certain extent, but we also, like every human capacity, know that it can go wrong. So if you want to know the objective standard of good and evil in life decisions of all kinds, the Torah gives us those objective standards. Why they're objective standards and how they are established as such and what's wrong with the subjective point of view is a long, long philosophical discussion. But I could give you, let's say, a short introduction to one strand of the thinking. There are certain aspects of morality which are, I would say, universally agreed upon and built in. Maybe they're very simple, and maybe they're few, and maybe they are not, they don't decide a lot about complex decisions, but they do exist. So, for example, if someone benefits me, and benefits me out of his care for me, I owe him something. Receiving a benefit from somebody else creates a moral debt. So, for example, let's say I'm drowning, and someone jumps into the water and saves me at some risk to himself and a great effort from him, and he does it because either he doesn't want a person to drown or he doesn't want me to drown. And then 3 weeks later, he calls me up and says, could you lend me $5,000? And I have $5,000 in my account to lend. And a casual acquaintance from down the street simultaneously calls me and asks me for a loan of $5,000. And I decide which one to lend it to by flipping a coin. There's something morally wrong going on, because this one saved my life, and that one's a casual acquaintance. And given the choice between the two of them, and I can't help both of them, I should certainly help the one who benefited me in that way. I have a moral debt to him. That's, I think, built into the idea of morality. Also, causing pain to innocent people for no morally justified purpose is regarded as wrong universally. Torturing small children for fun is wrong altogether. And if a person says to me, well, I don't think it's wrong, I don't say that it's wrong, I don't agree that it's wrong, I say, it's like a person who says, there aren't any tables. There are no tables. You can't tell me what to say. You think there are tables. I think there are no tables. I say, no, you don't think there are no tables. You don't think that. Your words are not correctly describing what you think. You can't think there are no tables, because here they are. So either you mean by tables radioactive radium or something, or you're insane, or you're lying. There are no tables isn't a thought that you can have, because it's just too obvious that there are tables. There are certain thoughts which you can't have, and the fact that you say that you have them doesn't mean you're telling the truth about yourself. So here too, if someone says, I think it's perfectly okay morally to torture small children for fun, I say, you can't think that, because it's too basic to morality that you can't do such a thing. See, either you don't mean by moral what I mean by moral, or you're not mentally competent, or you're lying, because that's not a thought you can have. There are certain limits to which that you can't push morality beyond. Now, what happens if the Creator qualifies for moral authority on the grounds of principles like that? So, let's take gratitude, back to gratitude. Who am I grateful to? My parents, my teachers, my friends, people who lend me money. I have a lot of people I'm grateful to because a lot of people have benefited me. And each one, the extent to which he benefited me, creates that kind of moral debt. And they're all genuine moral debts. Now let's put the Creator on the table with the rest. How much do I owe the Creator as a debt, a moral debt for gratitude? Wow. There's an awful lot that I owe to the Creator. I owe my parents, I do, and I owe my teachers. But if I owe my parents 150, and I owe my teachers 100, and I owe my friends 75, then I owe God infinity. They're all debts. They're all real debts. They're all genuine debts. But the amount of good that I receive from a Kadosh Baruch Hu is so enormous that the moral debt is enormous. Okay, now, when Kadosh Baruch Hu says, you know what I want from you? I want a half hour in the morning with leather boxes and straps. I want that. I know you don't understand why, but I want that. I want that from you. Tefillin. So I say, okay, let's see now. He wants a half hour with leather boxes and straps. And how much do I owe him? Do I owe him a half hour a day with leather boxes and straps? Well, for my existence and my health and my intelligence and my resources and for the way he guides my life, I think probably that half hour is within the limits of the debt. So it becomes a morally binding requirement to wear tefillin in the morning because of the moral debt that I have out of gratitude to the Creator for what He gives me. So that gives the system that the Creator creates for us a certain moral purchase. It has a certain moral basis. Now, this particular principle of gratitude is not the only principle that is basic to morality. There are other principles. What one really ought to do, and I would love to see someone do a PhD thesis on this, someone should make a list of all these morally basic principles and then assess the amount of authority that's given to the Creator by each one and try to give a description of the resulting totality of moral purchase that the Creator has. I haven't done that, but this is the project that gives you a picture of where the morality is coming from. Morality is coming from basic principles together with the way in which the Creator interacts with us, what He does with us, for us in the world. And then I think you'll see that what the rules are that the Creator lays down for us really are what's good and what's evil. They do determine what's good and what's evil by this process. I wouldn't say this is the only relevant process. It's not the only relevant process. There are other more sophisticated, more more, I would say, metaphysical processes. But this is one process, a genuine process whereby the things that the Creator wants us to do become the source of good, and the things He wants us not to do, the source of evil. That's one way to look at it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, who's next?
You don't think the Yeshivat Ohr puts it out well? How to like kind of, go through some of these topics we're talking about?
So Mesilas Yesharim, first of all, I spent a lot of time learning Ramchal in the last 30 years, and one of the thinkers that I've invested a great deal in. Mesilas Yesharim, which is what's translated as the path of the just, is a very difficult sefer. A very difficult sefer. You want to take it seriously and literally and work on how the concepts are defined and reconcile what he has on page 16 with what he says on page 102. It's a quite difficult sefer.
Well, I found that there Hashem was kind of hard for me, but Yeshivat Ohr was like a little bit more simplified.
Okay, it depends upon the level at which you read it. It's definitely all true. It's definitely one of the basic texts that's learned in all aspects of the Jewish community. Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Chassid, Misnagid, they're all, everybody does take it seriously. And if you can get inspiration from it and get direction from it, then it's certainly a classic, there's no question. It tells you what kind of depth that you...
It's not going to be used in that way.
Look, Jewish texts are typically read on different levels. They're meant to communicate on different levels. And reading something on a light level has an effect, and that effect is intended. And then reading it on a deeper level is a different effect, and that also is intended. So the fact that there are deeper levels doesn't mean you shouldn't start with the lighter levels and be inspired by them. And he has a system where he divides up your spiritual progress into steps and defines what they are, explains the practical methods that you can use to accomplish them. So it's a classic. Just saying that I once started to try to translate it into English, and I found that you have the same word, and if you want to use the same translation in all the places where the word appears, it became hopeless because I couldn't express the nuances of what was going on that way. I asked other people, and other people also agreed that in certain respects it's quite a difficult sefer. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't read it, and doesn't mean you shouldn't be inspired by it and use it. Just when you say he talks about some of these topics, he does, but to really analyze what he's saying about the topics is a challenge.
So you mean like going towards the end where he goes like a lot harder, like he gets, like you said, he breaks it out into a lot of pieces, but I mean, what I'm saying is I think a lot of the beginning of his book was, he puts it out there and hard study puts it, like Tzaddik, Nikias, and Gershis, how he puts it out there, like.
I'll give you one example of a thought that he has 26 chapters and he has 10 levels basically, and the levels are in order. How do you deal with the order? Is it that you should do level 1 and finish level 1 and then go to level 2 and then finish level 2 and then go to level 3, or can you work out a piecemeal? Some of level 1 and some of level 6 at the same time, and work on them and try to make progress in various different ways, in different order than the order that he gave you. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but there's another edition of that book, which is in dialogue form, which was found in a manuscript in the Soviet Union at that time, and there is a volume which publishes both editions, the dialogue version and the one that became famous and published, and they're not the same. They have the same similarity of presentation, but they're not the same. And in the dialogue version, he says one step at a time, and you have to complete each step before you go to the next step. And in the printed version, the universally printed version, he doesn't say that. which means that he wrote an edition, and he wrote a later edition, and he decided to revoke that idea and not put it in, which means that his settled opinion is, no, you don't have to do it in order. That's very, very important. How you use that book to improve your spirituality depends crucially on that idea, whether you have to do it in order or don't have to do it in order. So that's just one little thing that was going to have a big impact on how you use the book in a practical sense. There's another thing that he says there which raises a puzzle. What is humility? He says humility is when a person says, I don't deserve praise for my great qualities. And pride is when a person says, I deserve praise for my great qualities. Now, if you're schooled in logic, you hear right away a person who thinks he's worthless, a person who thinks he's nothing, a person who thinks he doesn't have any great qualities isn't humble. Doesn't qualify for humble. It's not thinking I'm nothing. It's knowing that I have great qualities and not taking credit for them. That's quite a different matter. Humility is a gigantic virtue. Moses is described as the humblest of all people in the Torah itself. When Moses came down from the mountain and saw them with the golden calf, he said, whoever has not been participated in this event, come to me, and all those who have committed idol worship with the golden calf should be executed on the spot. Moses was not a shrinking violet. Who am I to make a judgment? Who am I? I'm nobody. Other people know better than I. Maybe I should call a committee. We should discuss it and take a vote. No! We came down and said, kill them. So humility is not taking a back seat and not putting yourself forward and so forth and so on. Humility requires you to know that you have great qualities and just to say, I don't deserve credit for them. I didn't create them in myself. Even if I made effort, I had inspiration from other people, and who gave me the ability to make effort, and who crowned my efforts with success, and maybe somebody else who doesn't have the level of accomplishment that I have, maybe he deserves more credit for his effort to reach that level of accomplishment than I do for this level because I had more help than he did. So therefore I don't really deserve credit for my accomplishment. When you realize that that's what humility is, so then you realize that it's not the challenge, it's simply, humility doesn't require you to lie to yourself and say that you're nothing when you know very well that you're not nothing. And indeed, there used to be I saw a poster once, many years ago, a kid about 8 years old with a disgruntled look on his face, and he says, I know I'm somebody because God don't make junk. And that's right. God don't make junk. So the challenge is not to think that you're junk. The challenge is to recognize what you are and to recognize that. So humility now, with that definition, that's in the text, with that definition, becomes a quite different challenge from what a person might have thought. I think it's much more sane, it's much more realistic, and in certain ways, it's difficult. Because especially if you work on something and you succeed, it's very natural to take credit for what you've done. You did it, you say. Deeper, you understand, I made the efforts and Kodesh Baruch Hu gave me the results. So I didn't really do it, I didn't really accomplish it. But it's very difficult to take to heart because it means you have to suppress your ego. My example of this, and with this I'm going to finish for today, but my example of this is the following. IBM advertises. We have 10 positions, very highly paid, for people who are going to work on a very special project. Well, we want to get talented people, so we're setting up hundreds of stations all over the country. We have a week-long programming contest, and whoever is the best in the programming contest will get these. So people all over the country And the programming the concept is create a program that will do a certain job. Here's the computer. Here's the basic material in the computer. And when you write a program, you run a simulation, and you'll get an evaluation back, which will tell you what it does and what it doesn't do. And then you try to improve the program. We'll see how good a program you'll have at the end of the week. So people are doing this and going back and forth. And 10 people are chosen as the best of the hundreds. And in every case of these 10, they created a program that actually succeeded. Different programs, but they succeeded. Fine. Next week they come into IBM and they say, we're here for training for this new project. So yes, wonderful. I just want to tell you something. None of your programs worked. None of them. The results that you got back from the diagnostics were false. They were phony. We fed you the results that we wanted to give you so as to stimulate you on to the next test we wanted to test you on. None of the programs worked. But of all the programs that were made, of the hundreds of people, yours were the best failures. So that's why we chose you for the job. I think your ego would be a little reduced by that. So it didn't solve the prime factoring theorem. It didn't solve whether there's infinity of twin primes. Gee, I thought we were better than other people, but still, right. That's a correct picture of how it works. We are required to make effort, like I said before, but the results are always due to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the way you keep your ego in check, because you didn't create the outcome. You didn't make the outcome. You did that which God evaluated in its decision to give you the outcome. That's a success. No question that that's a success, but it is the success that you thought it was. And that's one way to stimulate your to develop your humility. So when you get to the point of analyzing some of his concepts in depth, you get a different message than you might have thought on the surface. But it's definitely a sefer which can be inspiring, instructive. It can actually push you in the right direction. Just that there are other deeper things going on there. When I asked my Rabbi whether I should study Musar, and what sefer I should study, he told me to study that sefer. And he told me why. Because Tzatto was a great Kabbalist. And everything he wrote was based on Kabbalah. And the Rebbe said that our commitment to the Kabbalistic system is such. And then you realize there are 26 chapters. Ask people about 26. That's a special number. That's the numerical value of God's proper name, so to speak. And there are 10 levels. And in the Kabbalah, 10 is a very big number. So you write a book and you have 10 levels of 26 chapters. Those who are in the know say, aha, we know where you're coming from. You've advertised it. You're coming from a Kabbalistic point of view. There is, in fact, a commentary on the Mesilas Yesharim that analyzes it in Kabbalistic terms. So once you realize that, there's a lot going on beneath the surface, which is part of the ultimate message of the book, of the Sefer. Yeah.
Just to go back to what we were having this session before Ben's question, when it comes to tefillin, let's say for example, right, that's morally just, Hashem's telling us, because that's how you show me gratitude, right? Let's say someone was Shomer Torah mitzvahs, kept the mitzvahs for, let's say, 20, 30 years, and tefillin, he didn't feel it helped his gratitude, didn't help him morally. And let's say, for example, kosher didn't help him feel, didn't help him morally. When it comes to someone who's taking himself in, bringing himself in, and saying his own ideas, how do you answer that question? The Torah is moral and just.
I'm sorry, I don't get the picture of this person. The person saves my life, and he says, I need your help. I'm painting my living room purple. I need your help to paint the living room purple. I measure the amount of effort it takes to help him paint his living room against what he did for me, and I see that what he did for me is much greater than what he's asking for. How could it not express my gratitude? How is that possible? I'm doing what he wants in response to the fact that he did something great for me. That, by definition, is expressing gratitude. If I don't feel that I'm expressing gratitude, I need psychological help, because that's what's going on. How could he not feel that? I don't understand what he means. I don't feel that it's expressing gratitude to put on tefillin. What do you mean you don't feel it? The Creator said He wants it from you, and He's doing so much for you. So of course you're expressing your gratitude by doing what He wants. That's what gratitude is. I think,
He missed the boat, basically. The person.
It's more than missing the boat. There's something wrong with his whole mental processes. No? It's not realistic, not mentally realistic. Okay.